I hope you and your family are doing okay and staying safe at home. While we want to keep an eye on the news, I'm trying to do what I love doing and trying to stay positive. In today's episode, I'm looking forward to hearing from Jason Murray. Jason, a computer engineer by training, has over 20 years of experience in information security. He has worn multiple hats, been a penetration tester, done compliance audits, and many more. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today, Jason?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
So before we get started, I'm always curious as to how people end up in their current role and what is their current role about.
So currently I'm a director of cybersecurity for professional services at M&P. I ended up here, I've been here just about over 10 years. 10 years actually was 2 weekends ago was my 10-year anniversary. I ended up here after bouncing around in a number of other companies, mostly professional services and consulting engagements. I ended up in security originally because I liked it as an engineering problem, right? I saw technology being deployed and then being broken into in the mid to late 90s. I thought, well, wow, that's an interesting engineering problem. Let's see if I can contribute there. Turns out, yes, it's an engineering problem, but it's more of an economics problem, and there's a very heavy human psychology component to it because there's humans involved with these. I can fix the computers all we want, but then you have to get the humans to use the computers, and those are problems that are difficult to solve if they can even be solved.
True, yeah. And it's true, like 85% of the breaches are due to human error. So yeah, user behavior plays a key role.
Yes.
Yeah, so with COVID-19, employees are working from home and new tools and new technologies are being set up. So with all that, so everything has changed. So what do you see the changes in IT priorities and security strategies for an organization?
Well, and a lot of security matters bleed over into other aspects. So, Harsh, I have to rely on you to keep me on topic sometimes, or we'll be here for 2 hours instead of however long we have. But I was thinking about this purely from an information security point of view. And you're right, priorities are changing. Now, the different tools that we're using is one of the reasons, and partly because the staff who are using them aren't used to using them. The people who have to support them haven't had to support them before. I mean, you take the example of everyone moving to Zoom meetings, right? If you're an organization that doesn't use Microsoft Teams, like mine does, we had that capability already, right? And it was relatively safe. We were comfortable with it. We knew how to do it. But all those companies that have to use Zoom, and Zoom had to basically scale up two orders of magnitude in a month, right? That usually takes a company 2 or 3 years to do, and they hadn't built their tool with certain security assumptions in mind. Mm-hmm. So now you're a company. I got a distributed workforce that I have to somehow have meetings with still. Well, let's use Zoom, okay, but it doesn't necessarily fit with the security you'd like to have. So what are you supposed to do? Just say no, we don't have meetings and we stop doing business? So there's that aspect of it. And another aspect that's coming up is people are at home. They may be working on corporate machines. They may have their own personal machines, and you don't know what's the security stance of that personal machines. The corporate machines, are they really designed to be disconnected from the environment for that long? Are they going to stay up to date? And to say nothing of the bad actors out there, don't miss an opportunity, right? So there's the trite saying of, never miss a crisis, never let a good crisis go to waste, I think is the quote. And the bad guys are certainly not let this crisis go to waste, right? Like right off the bat, right from the beginning, they're sending phishing campaigns. And if I use some jargon that you would like me to expand a little bit on, let me know and I'll try to explain it. Because I don't know what the level of knowledge of your audience is, but so you'll be getting those emails that are click here about this COVID-19 thing and click there about that COVID-19 thing. Say nothing of that it's tax time. Click here for your Canada revenue thing or all the money that the government is about put out, right? Click here to find out more about this. These are all opportunities for bad actors to trick you into clicking on links and trick your employees to clicking on links and provide passwords and usernames that they otherwise wouldn't give up. Did we train our staff on this? Often we haven't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they do get tripped up, they often don't know who to report it to, right?
Yes.
So those are definitely some things that are changing. You know, I wouldn't say that overall that it's different. It's just shifted a little bit, right? It used to be here, now it's here. But at the end of the day, you're still exposed to things.
Yes, and with that, like it's not only tools and strategies. So you're right. It's of more of user training because there's a shift in the way we work, and that reminds me of the news I read recently. So British government, they launched a scheme, and within 2 hours, all the inboxes and everywhere the phishing scam was, click here to know more about the details, click here to enter your details. And there were so many fake websites that came up after they launched the scheme. So yes, you need to train your employees to identify what's a fake email and what's a real email. Yeah.
Well, have you heard about this one too? Is everyone wants to do some kind of, they want to know what's up with COVID and they're tracking it, right? So there are some legitimate websites out there, and just like normal, there are some illegitimate websites out there. And I heard about an Android app. Now, I don't use Android, I use iPhone, but there's no reason it couldn't get into an iPhone app too. It was a case tracker, right? Oh, except it had spyware installed that was going to take over your phone. The bad guys are not letting an opportunity slide, right? So you just, and most people are not prepared for this. It's full court press. Strike while the iron's hot. Get in, break into these places, get those passwords. We don't know, the bad guys might not even know what they're going to do with it right now. They're just sitting on it and they'll use it later, right?
True. Yes. Yes. So that's interesting. So we both focus a lot on operational technology, and we talk a lot about cybersecurity in real estate and cybersecurity related to critical and non-critical systems that are there in buildings, in industrial. So how is operational technology cybersecurity different than enterprise security, and what changes are you seeing now?
Okay, well, this will be probably a long and rambling answer, but try to stick with me because I'm trying to pull all the threads together at the end of it all. So the trite answer is IT and OT, they both have a T in it, right? So that's the commonality. There's a technology there. Now, I bring that up because I still see after 20 years that there's a very, very heavy emphasis on starting with the T. Let's worry about the technology. And I think that's putting the cart before the horse. Most places that I've been to, they focus on the technology. Now, it happens to be because I'm dealing with the technologists. And of course they deal with the technology. This is what they do. This is what they're good at. This is what they like, they're comfortable with. But there's that disconnect with, and I use air quotes, the business, right? Yes. Oh, you speak tech, you don't speak the business, as if it's some distinct language that nobody else knows how to talk. Mm-hmm. But I think it does help anyone who's involved with a T discipline, an OT or an IT, that let's think about what the business does. What is this business that we are supporting? What's it trying to achieve? How does it create values for its customers? How does it function? And let's remember that the technology enables that function. It's a force multiplier. It allows you to do more with less input. It allows you to do things that you couldn't do before, like all this talk lately of AI and machine learning and all that, right? Yeah. Ooh, it's all fancy. Okay, but the way to think about that for me is, well, what can that allow me to do that I couldn't do before, right? Well, what does all the technology allow me to do that I couldn't do before? And that kind of, I want our listeners to keep that thought in the back of their mind as we talk about the rest of it, which is, here's the technology, let's deploy it because it allows us to do something we couldn't do before. Okay, but now let's jump into the technology and figure out, okay, well, what should we do so that we can not incur what we call technical debt? Now, technical debt is a term that I first bumped into in a software development context, and it is very much like financial debt. You're accumulating this, and hopefully you know you're accumulating this, and you're going to pay it down at some point, right? So you decide we're going to use this technology, and we know that it's not going to meet all of our security and availability and privacy needs, but we're going to do it because it gives us an opportunity to do something in the business we couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're going to fix it later. The problem is later never seems to come,
Yes.
and then you get breaches and all that. So that's the start of what I would say is happening with IT and OT. Is let's not think of T, let's think of the business. Now, how I would like to start with how are they the same? So how are information technology and operational technology the same? Now, as you said at the beginning, right off the bat, I'm trained as a computer engineer. I have a master's degree from U of T. So for me, this is all just bits and bytes on silicon, right? I don't get too caught up in the weeds that much. Like I don't like, oh, it's using this operating system versus that operating system, or it's using FPGAs versus that. Doesn't matter. It's technology that's used in a certain application. So what's the same? Well, what I'm seeing is, and maybe some of the listeners go, well, not in my environment. We have this particular, okay, yes, there are corner cases where what I'm about to say is generally not true, but let's talk about it more generally. I see a lot of Windows. I see a lot of Linux. Occasionally, we'll see some real-time operating systems, which you don't find in IT. But those Windows and Linux, I'm going to apply the same types of techniques to them in IT versus OT, right? Now I'll get into what's different about it in a little bit, but let's stick with what's common. So what's common also is if we want to connect these things in a network, it's still the same common networks that I'm using in my home office or in my enterprise wiring closet, right? It's network switches, it's routers. And then if you want to connect it to the rest of the corporate network, it gets even more like that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Now, actually, this is a bit of an irony for me because when I first started learning about information security came out of the military, very heavily out of the military, where they were trying to control, let's say they were trying to control, they wanted to prevent bad guys from doing fishy things with their computers because these computers were controlling missile launch sites and warships and submarines. That sounds an awful lot like operational technology to me, right? So the techniques originally came out of that, went into IT, and now we're starting to talk about them more in operational technology and ICS and so forth. So let's now, let's move on if you want and talk about what are the differences.
What's the differences? Yes.
Yeah. So for me, the differences are, yes, there are always going to be examples where there's a very technical specific difference of, well, this is actually using field programmable gate arrays, so that's a little bit special. Yes, that's a little bit special. Or this is using a serial bus connection instead of Ethernet. Yes, that's very specific. But one dirty secret that some people who didn't dig into the bits and bytes might not know is most of our networking protocols were basically invented by IBM in the 50s. They've mutated over time, but I can take a look at a lot of the frameworks and the packet structure right now, and it looks an awful lot like some of the token bus stuff from way back in the 50s, right? Yeah. So there's a lot more commonality than there are differences. But anyway, dive into the differences. So for me, the differences I see are that it's the application of the technology, right? So when we're going to apply things in an operational capacity, we have very long lifetimes, right? When I just got this new laptop, and I will probably get another new laptop in about 3 years.
Oh, yes.
And that's a long time. That's nothing. Right? We got stuff in ICS plants out there and connected to the OT networks. You're talking 10, 15 years before you replace it, right?
Yes.
Because you're going to buy it and it's going to have a write down and amortization schedule, and we're not replacing that until it's fully amortized. Okay, well, that changes how I would apply my techniques. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is one of the differences, is you have very different time frames for which you have to support the technology. Now, sometimes that can work in your favor. Right now, all the threat actors like to go after the latest vulnerabilities, by and large. if you have an old piece of equipment that's running an old version of DOS, you're probably pretty safe because no one's writing vulnerabilities for DOS 6.2 anymore, right? So, but you got to wait a long time for that to happen. And you might not like the pain of using such a less functional operating system. So that's one difference. Another difference is sometimes there's a real-time response that needs to be had, right? And you have, and it goes in with that is, I would say, a very modest network bandwidth requirements, right? Mm-hmm. This has a problem when we try to do our traditional vulnerability assessment tests. I can't just blast at the stuff and hope that it's going to handle it, because I may impact response times, I may saturate networks, and that will compromise the ability of whatever the technology is to do what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Availability is usually paramount, more so than, it depends. In IT, sometimes availability is paramount, but often it's integrity, right? Yeah. I need to trust that the data is accurate. Yes. That database of all of your client records or patient records or what have you, you need to have a high level of confidence that it's telling you the truth, that hasn't been messed with. Sometimes confidentiality is there as well, but in OT it seems to be to me that availability is the prevalent one that people want to talk about, right? Yeah. This is the one that, another one, interaction with the physical world. So here's where I go on my diatribe about the word cyber and how much I don't like that word, is because we use this word and it used to help clarify what we meant, right? It used to clarify that we meant, a computer doing something, but it's kind of intangible. It's connected to cyberspace, aka the internet. Nowadays, though, we are putting computers on physical devices so that we can actually control the physical world and get feedback from the physical world that's just mediated by a computer. Yes. It's not a physical gauge on something anymore. It's mediated by a computer. Well, that changes the game a little bit, right? Because if I'm interacting with the physical world, I can probably affect the physical world, and depending on what that thing is, I could turn off a pressure safety valve or something like that. So I once had a conversation, a little bit of an aside, I once had a conversation with my father, who he's retired now, but he used to work in the nuclear industry. And I was trying to explain to him what I did, and I was actually trying to get him to hook me up with a connection with their CISO so we could sell him some stuff. And I'm like, Dad, because he started back in the 70s, and he was originally a welder, so he was very much in the plant, knowing how to fix these physical things, carrying hot water, cold water, this, that, the other thing. And I said, well, you got a pipe running through it. It's got a valve and a gauge on it, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, what's the gauge connected to? Now he's like, a computer in the control room. I said, there you go. I'm like, are you not concerned? Like, he's a big safety guy too, right? And I'm like, are you not concerned that something could affect the computer on that? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's what I do, right? And so it can be very serious. Everyone, I don't know if, I don't know if people on who are watching this would be familiar with Stuxnet, things like that, right? But this is where you're interacting with the physical world. Right?
True. And that's an interesting story, because, like people, they say, what will happen to a heating or a cooling system or a building automation system? But that runs on a computer. Yes. And that computer, now have plugged it to internet. So there you go. That's the hacker's dream come true. Yep. So and that's really interesting, because the time frame is different. Like, once the machine is set in OT environment, it stays there. And we have seen that old operating system, Windows XP, still running there. While in IT, once this system is like 2 years, 3 years, it's changed. New technology is coming up. And then availability.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you always need your building automation system up and running.
Yep. And now I've seen that sometimes you'll have redundancy available, right?
Yes.
Now I come out of a telecom background. So before I got into security, I was into telecom, and I worked for a little company called ClearNet, if anyone remembers them. But you had the main telephone switch had an A and a B side. Yes. And A ran everything until you needed to do maintenance. And then you know what you did? You switched to the B side, which could run
Yes.
everything. You upgraded the A, you switched back, and if everything was good, you let it soak for a week. And if everything was good, you know, when you're a telecom, a week is a long time. That's a lot of phone calls. If everything is fine, you can upgrade B.
Mhm.
Some places you see that back or the redundancy, and some places you don't see the redundancy, right? So
Yes.
you would a lot of play. I when you come, and that comes almost from a cost cutting and a cost savings, and the wrong mindset of, well, this thing over here doing nothing is costing me money. No,
Mhm.
that thing over there doing nothing is doing nothing with a specific purpose of providing you with the failover in case you need it, right?
True. Yes,
Anyway,
and I
that was
remember, yeah, and I remember because this is what we have in common because I started my career in telecom. It,
oh
it's an open wave. So yes, we used to have that failover concept and a node and a B node. So I remember that, and it's true. But in building automation system, we hardly see this failover concept.
yeah.
So those really interesting insights, and that help our audience to clear what is OT and what is IT. So before we sign off,
Okay.
one key takeaway for our audience to stay safe while working remote.
Oh, that's a tough one because it's hard for me to boil it down into one thing. Um,
What was the top one for you?
well, that's not fair because I'm naturally suspicious by nature working in this field, right?
You
Um,
big yes.
yeah, so even so, for those who are watching this, you may have noticed in the news that M&P actually got hit with a cyber incident recently too. I was affected. I had no laptop for a time and I had to get it rebuilt. So I'd say that, and I didn't click. Of course, I'm going to say this right. I didn't click on the link. I don't know who did. What I would say is notice what's out of the ordinary, right? Because even though you are connected remotely over VPNs or what have you,
Mhm.
your machine should still, if you have a work machine or a home machine, it should still largely function the way you expect it to function. Um, that part of the environment might not change. You know, it might, your network connection might slow down. So if you're used to accessing a file over a network share or something like that, it might take a little bit longer because everyone's at home,
Mhm.
right? But it shouldn't function completely differently, right? So for instance, I logged in that fateful morning and noticed, man, the responsiveness of my laptop is not right. So I
Mm,
rebooted
yes.
and it came up with a warning screen. And I immediately reported it to my corporate IT and said, I have a problem. That's what I would say to do just to be safe, right? Don't worry that someone is going to slap you on the wrist and say, no, bad user. No, no, no. You got to be part of the solution of keeping this remote approach going. I actually think that this remote approach that we're all kind of adopting is probably not going anywhere. I think most companies are going to realize, hey, you know, that wasn't so bad. We
Mhm.
managed it. We can do
Yes.
more of this.
Yes.
Maybe we don't need to have face-to-face meetings all the time and sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. Um, the other thing is be suspicious of emails that are topical, that aren't coming from what you would call approved sources. I'm not saying be paranoid, but if all of a sudden you're getting a whole bunch of email from Canada Revenue Agency, that's fishy, right? So
Yes.
just watch out for those.
Yes. Those were really interesting insights. Like look for signs and report if you see any suspicious activity, because this is
Yeah.
what we miss. So thank you so much, Jason. I really like the specifics you shared and how practical your advice is. Jason Murray, please follow him on LinkedIn. So before we sign off, I would say as the real estate industry starts to embrace tech as part of its daily operations, the security element cannot be ignored. Thank you so much. Stay safe and bye.
Bye bye.